And now, once again, let me welcome everyone to our webinar on exemplary conservation leadership in New England and across 6 continents. Today's event is co-sponsored by Harvard University's Conservation Innovation Forum and the Government Innovators Network at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center for Democratic Governance and Innovation. Our moderator is James Levitt, Director of the Program on Conservation Innovation at the Harvard Forest and Manager of Land Conservation Programs in the Department of Planning and Urban Form at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. Jim will be starting us off today.
Thank you, Jessica, and welcome to you all. It is, I think, now officially mud season in New England. I'm looking out the window, and we're coming out of a snowstorm in early April, which is something fairly common here in New England. We are delighted to have all of you here with us today to talk to 2 exemplary leaders in land conservation, both in the United States and internationally. Before we launch into what I think will be a very interesting presentation, I want to take a moment to remember someone who appeared on an early version of this webinar perhaps 7 or 8 years ago, who passed away in March. His name was Fred Danforth. I think those of you who are familiar with conservation finance remember Fred very clearly. He was a larger-than-life figure who decided that after a very successful career in venture finance, that he would pioneer the asset class which led to the formation of ecosystem investment partners. Fred did everything with tremendous enthusiasm and determination. He was a football player at Yale. He was a very successful investment banker. He was a dedicated family man, and he really did help create a new kind of investment class for investment. I'm going to read very briefly a short summary of his career. Fred got involved in ecosystem investments after his experience in the Blackfoot Valley in Montana. He decided that he would figure out how to do, or at least manage, stream restoration, which he did very successfully in the Blackfoot Valley. And then after 2 years of stream restoration efforts, the trout in this stream began to return, and they were tremendous. The smile on Fred's face when he held one of those fish was even more tremendous. This gave him the inspiration to found Ecosystem Investment Partners, actually in the room next to the room in which I sat in Belmont, Massachusetts. It is now based in Baltimore and has over $500 million of assets under management, making it one of the largest sources of private capital for ecological restoration projects in the world. We will miss Fred, and we are certain that his spirit of entrepreneurship and innovation will live on in his firm, and that he will be an inspiration for generations of ecosystem financiers in years to come. Okay. With that, and our best wishes to Fred's family, let us talk about 2 extraordinary institutions that have been involved in conservation innovation at present, in the recent past and at present. The first is Middlebury College, which was honored on February 22nd of this year at the Harvard Kennedy School in a ceremony designating them the recipient of the first Charles H.W. Foster Award for exemplary leadership as an academic institution in land conservation. The award was accepted by Middlebury's president, Lori Patton, and we're going to show you a brief clip of the words that Lori shared with us at that ceremony. And that will be followed by a discussion with Nan Jenks-Jay, who is the Dean of Environmental Affairs at Middlebury, who will explain how Middlebury got together the human resources, the capital, the natural assets to protect 2,100 acres of absolutely vital conservation land in the heart of the Green Mountains, known as their Breadloaf campus. So first, let's turn to the clip of Lori Patton on February 22nd speaking at the Harvard Kennedy School.
Middlebury has long been a leader in environmental education.
So that was Lori Patton again, who is so eloquent. She herself is a poet. She was referring at the end of that passage to partnering with Harvard and other institutions of higher education in the conservation task ahead of us. That partnership that she was referring to is something called Alpine, or Academics for Land Protection in New England, of which Middlebury is a very active member and is currently contributing to plans for the coming year. We happen to have, as you know, Nan Jenks-Jay on the line, and Nan and I are going to have a brief discussion about the Bread Loaf Initiative, about the place that's been protected, and about how it got done. We're going to do this in a question and answer format. So, Nan, are you on the line right now?
I am.
Perfect. So I want to start by saying that the Bread Loaf lands in the Green Mountains were originally given to Middlebury, bequeathed to Middlebury, by a gentleman named Joseph Battelle, who was an early conservationist who had the intent that some of the lands remain as parklands. Now, given Mr. Battelle's intention at the beginning of the 20th century, we went through some twists and turns to get to the point where this land needed to be permanently protected in the 21st century. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened after the gift that Mr. Battelle made to Middlebury?
Sure, thanks, Jim. Battelle was a student at Middlebury College and later went on to become a businessman and a philanthropist. And he single-handedly amassed the largest amount of land holdings in Vermont at the time. That was at the turn of the century in the 1900s. Upon his death, as you said, in 1915, he did bequeath 35,000 acres of land to the college, some of which was to remain in parkland, or what he called wildlands, and not to be cut, which was a pretty early concept at the time. So the college has held this land, parts of this land, for over 100 years now. It was said that the view from the porch of the Bread Loaf Inn, according to Battelle, no trees were to be cut so that everyone could experience the magic of this place. So the college, in respecting the donors' wishes, went ahead and established a forest committee and hired a forester for at least 50 years. But in the hard times post and pre-war, the finances at the institution were hard-pressed, and the college sold 33,000 acres of that land to the neighboring U.S. Forest Service, some of which now is fortunately in federally designated wilderness. But it's the remaining Battelle gift and the adjacent parcels that the college subsequently acquired that comprise the 2,100 acres in the protection that we're talking about today.
Okay, so given that, next slide, please. How did the protection of Bread Loaf that was achieved in very recent years come about, and what makes it unusual? And let me note, Nan, that I failed to say before that a gentleman named Louis Bacon and his wife Gabrielle, through their foundation, the Moore Charitable Foundation, played a critical role in all of this. And at the ceremony at Harvard, we recognized the Bacons as well as Middlebury College.
That's true. I think we've both been the wonderful recipients of the generosity of the Bacon family and the Moore Charitable Foundation. This particular project really represents a convergence of people, values, and economic needs. The project was very unprecedented, and it was very complex. This was a long-standing dream of our outgoing president, Ron Leibowitz, but it was a dream of many other people as well, as it turned out. When Ron was a student in the summer language school studying Russian, he actually escaped to Bread Loaf as a respite from the intense language school doctrine. And he and others held this dream, but it seemed out of reach for the college because it could not, an institution like ours can't give away an asset. And as supportive as our trustees have been for environmental innovation and leadership, they are bound by their fiduciary responsibility, just like all other trustees are. But Ron wanted to ensure that Bread Loaf was an integral cornerstone of Middlebury and not to let it fall to the kind of financial pressures that occurred before. So in our world, economics must underlie all value-based decisions. And it's not helpful, although I'm coming to see that there is some benefit here, but the IRS has no incentives for nonprofits to gift land. So a creative partnership was designed with the college, the Vermont Land Trust, and a gift from a donor, Louis Bacon, and who is both an alum and a trustee of the college, and his more charitable foundation to donate the development rights to the land trust and create a binding conservation easement on the land. Bacon is a celebrated conservation philanthropist, as you've noted, Jim, and he had also developed a love for Bread Loaf when he was a student walking, skiing, and hunting and learning on that land. There are other methods that could have been employed to protect that land, but this was the one I've described briefly here, outlined here, with the conservation easement, and its purposes were the ones the college felt would keep the land most intact and respect the original donor's wishes. I make it sound simple, but it took many years and dozens of actors, from trustees, alumni, administrators, faculty, staff, students, and a host of partners to design and finalize this deal.
Great. It took people from Stefan Nagel, who is an alumni, who is a practicing lawyer in Boston, who I've talked to at length about this, to Mr. Leibowitz, to the Bacons, to really an army of people to structure this in such a way that it would work for everyone. And the example that they've set is one that we hope inspires other institutions in New England who hold a lot of land and far beyond to emulate. So the conservation easement describes three purposes. They're up on the screen right now. Can you describe these in a little bit of depth, Nan?
Sure, I can. First, there's the ecological and forest values, and this land is it's the home of dozens of unusual species, and wildlife finds shelter in the old-growth hemlock forests that were left behind as an unsuitable wood when the rest of the mountains were cut over. And the hemlocks are about 250 years old. The uplands have wetlands and cataracts and ponds that support rich diversity of aquatic life. So this is a pretty unusual upland mountain area. Additionally, this land is directly adjacent to over 400,000 acres of Green Mountain National Forest, creating a critical uninterrupted habitat and connectivity to wilderness land. So it's a very large-scale landscape matrix. During this process, there was an ecological assessment that was conducted, which I'll talk about more in a minute, but that provided these new ecological values that we actually didn't know about and that are totally different from the rest of the Green Mountains, and the GIS maps became the basis of the conservation easement. The next piece was the recreational values. Bread Loaf includes a lot of trail systems for public use, and that's very important to us to identify, to call out, and to continue to maintain. The Reichert ski area has 40 miles of groomed trails. Those trails are also used for hiking in the summer. The Catamount backcountry ski trail and hiking trail that runs end-to-end from Massachusetts to Quebec, 300 miles through Vermont, also crosses through the Bread Loaf lands, creating even more public access. And a really unusual spirit and nature trail is maintained by a multi-faith group locally within the community. And finally, the final purpose is education. And the lands are the home to the Bread Loaf School of English, which was established in 1920. It's the largest English master's degree program in the United States, and Robert Frost taught there for 40 summers, walking the trails and forests that inspired his poetry. I'm happy to say that Frost's farmhouse and his rustic writing cabin are both located on this now protected land. Bread Loaf is also the host of the Environmental Writers Conference, Young Writers Conferences, in addition to field courses, that are taught there and student theses and faculty research. I must say that this land is as rich with human history as it is with flora and fauna. Few woods have inspired such literary creativity or have seen the passage of so many writers, poets, and educators.
That's great. I just want to underscore one thing you said, Nan, which is that the Bread Loaf campus is part of a much larger landscape, including privately conserved lands as well as the Green Mountain National Forest. So it's a piece of a puzzle that covers, I believe I'm correct in saying, tens of thousands of acres of land, and one of the most beautiful pieces in that mosaic. So Middlebury is doing its part not only with its responsibilities to its student, faculty, and alumni, but as a member of a much larger community.
That's true.
Okay, so many people were involved in this project. I mentioned just a few of them previously. What were their roles, and how instrumental were they in getting this deal done?
Well, you're right, Jim. It was a very inclusive project, and sometimes these kind of initiatives can kind of go forward with a handful of people and not much transparency. But that certainly wasn't the case here, which made it an exciting learning opportunity for higher education. So many minds made it possible, and just as thousands of students have been inspired by the spirit of Bread Loaf over time, this project had a special role for the trustees, which was twofold. First, to unanimously endorse the gift of the conservation easement to the Vermont Land Trust, and second, to provide a financial match to the Moore Foundation gift that established an endowment for Bread Loaf for all time. So thousands of hours and dozens of actors contributed to make this landmark project a reality, as you said, from the trustees and students, alumni, faculty, and staff, and to our partners. And two particularly unique aspects of participation I want to call out and share with you, because I think they make the project unusual and worth replicating. So a faculty member was contracted along with about 10 students to conduct an ecological assessment of the Bread Loaf lands that I mentioned earlier. And it became the GIS maps and the basis for the conservation easement. These ecological attributes turned out to be vastly different from any other part of the Green Mountain, and so this knowledge became critically important. It did two things. It gave us a sense of how unique Bread Loaf was, and to be honest, no one else, not the state of Vermont, not the Forest Service, not the Nature Conservancy, it was quite interesting. No one had the fine-grained detail that we had on this area about how different it is. We think that difference will be important as resilience during climate change that gives species the ability to move about in an otherwise very, very kind of homogeneous landscape. Additionally, this gave merit to ecosystem services because there was so much that we found out about this area as far as flood control and mitigation in upland areas. So the second part that was unusual was that we contracted a recent graduate to chronicle the process from the beginning to end for the college's archives through 30 interviews, and in which she captured the stories and values that Bread Loaf evokes. And those stories, it turns out, share values that are ecological, historic, literary, recreational, scenic, contemplative, spiritual, educational, flood mitigation, as I said, carbon sequestration, and more. Why would we contract this recent alum to undertake this effort? Because many times these projects are reduced in the end to dollars and numbers of acres, and the true meaning behind the conservation gets lost. We want the Bread Loaf lands to tell their own rich story and to share the diverse values. When historians, scholars, students, and other interested people go back and look at this, they'll learn more than how the land was protected, but why, through the stories of people in place.
That's fantastic. That historical aspect of it, I think, is so important. Now, let me ask you one or two more questions quickly. Do you see this project as a model, as I just said it was for other colleges and universities in protecting their lands.
Absolutely. I mean, after all, we're educators, and it's an integral part of our being to share knowledge. It's also our goal at Middlebury to inspire others so that they can adapt this model to their own circumstances. You know, as well as many others, that colleges and universities, as well as private schools and religious orders and other NGOs, are large landowners, and they hold on to the land as a rainy day asset. Why not be more creative? Many donors are passionate alumni are involved in land conservation all across the country, and as Laura will tell us, across the globe. So why not through their alma mater? Our colleagues at Kenyon College have shown us this to be true. Alumni dollars exceeded the requests each time they came to protecting lands adjacent to the college in rural Ohio. So there are many opportunities to achieve the outcomes that we've talked about today and that others on the webinar know, multitudes of tools and incentives, but higher education could lead, as it has in environmental and sustainability programs, and together our collective impact will be all that much greater across the landscape.
Fantastic. So last question for you, Nan, is what is next for Middlebury with regard to the Breadloaf campus and with other college lands?
Well, a couple ways to answer that. First of all, we're taking Katie Michael's work, who did the chronicling, and we'll be publishing that to make that information available to others. We'll also be taking Mark Lappin and students' work on the ecological assessment, and we'll be publishing that as well, because we think there are unique aspects of this project, and we don't want those to fall to the wayside. For Middlebury, this is an institution living its values, and we think other institutions can do that too. For us, it's environmental ethos and our educational mission, and also our financial responsibility. Those three go hand in hand, but we view that these can be replicated many times over. The second thing that we hope to do is spend more time working with Alpine and on your goals and to get the messaging out. And the third aspect is that we're ushering in a new era of land stewardship. So Middlebury currently has 6,000 acres of forest and agricultural lands, and we're now in the process of writing a new section into the updated master plan about lands and real estate and stewardship. So it's exciting to see that this will be going forward under the leadership of our new president, Lori Patton.
Nan, thank you so much. That was eloquent and I think a blueprint for your colleges and universities throughout New England and the rest of the country and, in fact, the world. So let me say that we're going to, after we talk to Laura, take questions for both Nan and Laura at the same time. There is a question box on the side of your screen where you can post those questions, and then I will offer those to our two guests. So next we turn to Laura Johnson. Laura and I are colleagues working together with several others to launch something called the International Land Conservation Network. The network is actually aimed not simply at a state of the United States, Vermont, but rather 6 continents. That is, all the continents on Earth except for Antarctica. We haven't found a land trust kind of organization down there yet, but I'm sure we will at some point. Laura has a presentation to introduce this audience to this new organization, and I will give it no further ado other than to ask Laura. First, Laura, are you there?
I think so. Can you hear me?
I hear you very well. And
Great.
Then secondly, very briefly to share with the audience how you got involved in this project after you had a very distinguished term as the president of the Massachusetts Audubon Society.
Well, thanks, Jim, and Nan, thank you. It was really interesting to hear you talk again about the project at Middlebury, which I think is very inspiring, so thank you for that. Jim asked that I say a few words about how I started doing this. I left being president of Mass Audubon, which is the largest and still independent Audubon society in the U.S., about 3.5 years ago, and in the process of thinking about what I wanted to do next, Jim, who I'd known for many years and who had been a board member of Mass Audubon, suggested that I take a closer look at the way some of the tools and models of land conservation in the U.S. are being adapted in other parts of the world. And at the same time, I think probably many people who are on this webinar know Peter Stein, and Peter had just received the Kingsbury Brown Award and Fellowship from the Land Trust Alliance and from the Lincoln Institute, and Peter was sort of looking at the same question. So between the three of us, Jim, Peter, and I, we became aware that there's just so much going on around the world, and it wasn't just through our investigation. There has been for a number of years a strong group of participants at the Land Trust Alliance's rally who come from outside the U.S. and come to learn more about land conservation and to share their experiences. So it just became apparent through that that there was a real interest and need in people networking together with practitioners in the U.S., and so that was really the beginning of this work. So I'm going to say a few words in this presentation about how we started the International Land Conservation Network and what our purpose is in going forward. And I know that on this webinar there's an awful lot of really knowledgeable group.
There you go.
What's that?
You're going in and out, so I think we've got you back now.
Okay. I guess one of the things to start with is just what is the mission as we've developed it of this new network. And as you see here, connect organizations and people around the world that are accelerating voluntary, private, and civic center action that protects and stewards land and water resources. So I think one of the key things is that private land conservation, as we know it in the U.S., is just not the same in the rest of the world. The land trust movement in the U.S., which has really started here in Massachusetts in 1891 with the creation of the trustees of reservations, and now through all of these decades is really one of the most highly effective and organized set of institutions that carry about some variation of the same mission, which is to protect important resources. And there is nothing quite like that. It is not the norm in the other parts of the world. Now, there are lots of good reasons for that. There's not a perceived need for the kind of private land conservation that we've developed here in the U.S. There's a sense that government will do it, and that clearly happens in a lot of parts of the world. Importantly, just land tenure systems or the rule of law, a reliable sense of ownership rights that are transferable and are stable over time. That is not the case in the rest of the world. There's not necessarily sort of basic civil government or norms and rules that can be relied upon in the context of land ownership and tenure. But it is changing rapidly in many parts of the world, and I will just share with you quickly 3 such examples that sort of indicate the kind of interest that is out there. One, and you see here from the European Commission, a publication from a couple of years ago, and the underlined parts of this are what I want to share. The understanding that conservation cannot be solely the responsibility of governments is widening. And then below in the next paragraph, in short, we are learning that nature conservation is too big and important a challenge for governments to address alone. So that is from Europe. From Chile, Así Conserva Chile, which is, as it says here, a self-organized group of property owners, large and small, and they've come together, again, underlined, we are united by the desire to create protected areas within our territory, Together, we created ASIC Conserva Chile, which is the Association of Conservation Initiatives on Private and Indigenous Lands. And they are seeking support, legal frameworks, and social recognitions to protect their land, essentially. So that's in Chile. And then finally, an example from Australia. From the Australian Land Conservation Alliance, which was founded just a few years ago. Again, it is no longer sufficient to rely on public protected areas alone for biodiversity conservation, and it is widely recognized that private land conservation is a crucial part of protecting Australia's environmental assets. So those are just 3 examples of other parts of the world which are really beginning to focus on private land conservation, as we have been doing in the U.S. now for decades. So in pursuing our thinking about this, this private land conservation model is one that I developed. It needs continual improvement. I don't put it forward as sort of the last word on this, but as I tried to think about what were the enabling conditions for private land conservation to be successful, I came up with, the framework is financial, institutional, and legal, and has, elements within each of those larger buckets about the kinds of things you need to have successful private land conservation. And for those of you who are involved with the Land Trust Alliance out there, it sort of corresponds to the Land Trust Alliance's tripartite pace, quality, and permanence. So the pace of land conservation is often determined by how many resources are available to make it happen. The quality of land conservation is often determined by strong institutions and systems and capacity to carry out good conservation and to make it durable over time. And then finally, the permanence of land conservation relates significantly to a legal framework that allows you to permanently restrict land over the long term. And this has turned out to be, the legal framework has turned out to be one of the most interesting aspects of this, because here in the U.S. we have a legal tradition of common law, and that has allowed us, and I won't get into too many of the details of it, but basically conservation easements have been a real driver of private land conservation in the U.S., and especially since the Uniform Conservation Easement Law was proposed in 1981, that has really propelled the growth of the private land conservation movement in the U.S. But as it turns out, most of the rest of the world is not common law, it is civil code, and civil code countries tend to, restrictions on property are disfavored. So something like a conservation easement is simply not available for use in a land conservation context as it is here in the U.S. Interestingly, that is something that's changing, and something that certainly the network itself is helping to take new and creative looks at. So let me move on to what happened, sort of as Peter and Jim and I were doing this. We ended up convening a group of people as part of Rally in Providence, Rhode Island in the fall of 2014. This is some of the group that then got together at the Lincoln Institute. And there was really strong agreement that the idea of creating an organized network of international, private, and civic land conservationists was needed, that there was real interest in doing it, support for doing it, and we decided that we would indeed go ahead and do it, fueled by a startup grant from the Packard Foundation and supported by the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, which has given us a home, both literally and in terms of providing an institutional and legal home for us. Now, again, for those knowledgeable on the call, you know that the Lincoln Institute helped to incubate the Land Trust Alliance in the early 1980s when it was still the Land Trust Exchange. So there's a nice bookending of the Lincoln Institute helping to start the Land Trust Alliance in the U.S. and now helping to start this international network. So we came together, kind of began working, set a bunch of first-year goals for ourselves, and one of the most important things we wanted to do was actually figure out who was out there. So we, last summer, did a sampling, a census of what's going on around the world, and as you can see here, just quickly, there is not a lot of data, and we need better information on what kind of organizations are out there, what they look like, what they do, where their money comes from, what kind of land conservation are they doing, what kind of tools are they using. You know, there's still a lot more to be done to try to understand what's going on out there, but what was clear is that there is, in fact, a lot going on out there, and it is around the world. So far, we've identified 77 countries. We know there are more. They are relatively new, most of them in the last 25 years, and many of them even more recent than that. They're very diverse, from very small volunteer to large professional groups. Obviously, the Nature Conservancy and WWF and CI and WCS are all working internationally. There's more and more of them. Again, clearly a real epicenter is here in North America between the US and Canada, but it's happening around the world, and they really are interested in networking and getting to talk not only to US practitioners, but to others around the world. This information is now available on the ILCN's website, which you see here, the URL, landconservationnetwork.org, and I encourage you to go there. Each of these little dots on the map on our website will pop up with information about the organization that is represented by the dot. We continue to work on improving the map. It's been a technological challenge to get it up there, and we are beginning the process of trying the second round of this survey and census to improve the data that we have. So we have developed a role, as we've defined it here, for the International Land Conservation Network to convene, to disseminate, to promote partnerships and collaboration, and to raise awareness. And those really are the driving elements of what we're trying to do at this point. I'm just going to focus, I've just focused on the census, which is a baseline of knowledge about organizations around the world and who the audience might be. I want to talk a little bit about convening. We did convene our first global conference in Berlin last fall. We had more than 90 people from 27 countries around the world, representing public, private, civic, and the academic sectors. We had the global groups like the Nature Conservancy and WWF, and then very local initiatives from all over the world, including Myanmar. And they were emerging leaders and seasoned professionals. There was a tremendous amount of connections made within the group, networking in real time. Relationships were formed, for example, between a couple of people who came from New Zealand and from a person who works for the Chesapeake Conservancy in Maryland, and already are talking about how to exchange information around some technological tools that are being used at the Chesapeake Conservancy. Also between the Chesapeake Conservancy and Canada, the Nature Conservancy of Canada, which, as you probably know, is not the same as Nature Conservancy US, and between Chile and Canada and other civil code countries and common law countries. Other common law countries include, well, obviously England, but also Australia, all of Canada except Quebec. So there was a very rich discussion around whether some kind of servitude, covenant, or easement can be adapted to civil code countries, and that dialogue taking place among practitioners from Chile and Canada and the US and various European countries. And then there was the reemergence of an idea of an European land conservation network, which is a very exciting prospect. I'll just read very quickly a comment that came back to us in the evaluations that we asked for. It's a very small NGO in Italy, and she said the different organizations organized during the meeting explored a wide range of topics related to land conservation. This aspect allowed learning about methodology, systems, and projects of conservation already applied and tested all around the world. In this way, the Congress opened our mind, exclamation point. All talk.
Laura, we've lost your voice again. Are you still there?
possibilities to work on land conservation. And she was an example of the many people who were just so excited to be part of this. So in addition to the practitioners, there were a number of policymakers who participated virtually in the conference and remained very interested in the work. Among the things that they offered the group, and which is so important to support going forward, as you see here, interest from Chile, from the European Commission in Belgium, from Australia, a real strong endorsement of the need for the network, of the need for land conservation organizations to share best practices, to understand what is going on from country to country, and to learn from each other. By the way, this picture here is one of the participants from Myanmar, and we're waiting to know whether he is going to be part of a conference he's organized in Myanmar around private land conservation, which is a very new concept in Myanmar. So that's another potentially very exciting thing. So let me close by just saying what we're going to continue to do as I said, to disseminate and convene and partner and raise awareness, focusing on areas around conservation finance, conservation law and policy, the strength of the institutional organizations, and then stewardship practice. And we'll be using regional meetings and global meetings and other tools through our website, such as webinars, e-newsletters, and expert networks. We will end with a call to action. I really think the network is coming at a crucial juncture, and it's going to be a really important tool for advancing private and civic land conservation around the world. Our next steps include the fact that, frankly, we need to find more money and resources to carry out the work. If you go online, you can sign up for our newsletter and explore the website, which would be great. We appreciate your feedback. We're going to be continuing to look for expertise around the world, people who are willing and able to donate or give of themselves and their knowledge to share with others and to help build the network. So, Jim, let me close there because I know we're getting close. I know you wanted to save some time for us to take questions. So let me stop there.
Very good, very good. And I just want to note that your speaker, Laura Johnson, took that beautiful picture in Massachusetts that you're seeing on the screen right now with a very popular phone that's advertised as taking great pictures, proof positive. All right, so we now have time for questions. We have one submitted. I invite the 47 of you who have listened to all of this great discussion to submit questions to us, and I will read them online. The first question comes from Carl DuPolt, and he asks a critical question, which I will convert to apply to both Nan and Laura. How are these donated conservation areas financially sustainable over time? Nan, do you want to start?
Sure. I think that's why in the Red Loaf project it was so important to have the endowment as part of the project. And the endowment, unlike some endowments that are set up for the monitoring of conservation easements, this is actually for the stewardship of the land. And so there's an additional endowment that the Vermont Land Trust has that is part of the monitoring. But I think that makes a big difference, and if that financial element isn't calculated in the beginning, then our hands are really tied over time as to what we can do.
Laura, do you want to give us a little insight into financial sustainability as well? You talked just briefly about that before.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question and one that applies whether you're in the U.S. or elsewhere, and I think that is one of those pieces of learning or best practice that we can share from the U.S. elsewhere, because the Land Trust movement, I think, has learned, in some cases, the hard way, that if you don't think about the money up front, you're going to have a problem. So that either means raising endowment or figuring out other ways to provide a stream of income to manage the conservation lands that we either have an interest in by easement or that we own outright. And certainly it's a major focus of the Land Trust Alliance in terms of encouraging and providing support to land trust to be thinking about and building that kind of resilience and capacity for the long term. Because here in the U.S., it's the promise of perpetuity, and that's a very long time. So we better be thinking about the money. So I think it's a great question, one we all need to have in mind.
Okay, another question. Again, I invite the audience to submit questions to the panel. How do you manage over time collaboration between the sectors? Most of what we've talked about is action that was voluntarily taken by either a college or by a variety of NGOs and private institutions around the world. How do you reach out and engage the collaborative energies of the public sector and of the nonprofit sector, in Nan's case, or of the academic sector, and also of indigenous peoples?
Well, I think, I don't know how to answer that except by saying that there needs to be open communication and dialogue to thrash through what are the, what are the competing priorities, how are you going to balance them, and, is there a shared vision that can take into account people's different competing needs. I see, there's a question I think that's popped up around protecting, for example, tigers, and whether tigers are actually wanted by the locals, and I think that's where some things like the ecotourism and other ways of addressing the needs for livelihoods, recognition of cultural norms, and long-term sustainability of resources can bring people together, not drive them apart. At the end of the day, people, I think, if they have some better solutions, they, like all of us, want clean air, clean water, a financially sustainable future for their families. And the important thing is to have the competing interests in the room to drive solutions.
Nan?
I would just agree with everything Laura said. And I think one thing that I've discovered over time working, actually I worked in the land protection field for a long time, even though I've been in academia. And it really is important for the different entities, the different stakeholders, to put on the table what their highest priority is. And that might be someone else's second priority, but you have to really be honest about that and get it all out there. And I think if you're working with a management plan, if you all agree and work through a management plan, then that's something that's a common document that everyone's agreed to. And you can go forward and continue to go back to that. But it's really important today. None of our large problems are going to be realized through solutions in any other way than through collaboration. So believe me, we teach more collaboration now than we ever have. And but we have a society of people who have grown up through competition. And we have to leave a little bit of the competition. I think Laura's comment about the kind of good tension about competition, but we also have to leave a little bit of that competition behind so that we can champion the collaboration.
Yeah. Let me add that it's come to my attention, particularly working with Laura in the ILCN, how important it is to pay attention to the voices of indigenous peoples as well, particularly when we're dealing with places like Brazil and Indonesia, where there are very large tracts of forest that for which the title is to some extent unclear, that engaging the indigenous people in the conservation conversation and giving them, in some instances, title or helping them get title to the properties on which they live can be a key element in achieving large landscape conservation. So colleges and universities, for example, in New England may only have a few occasions to interact with Native peoples, for example, in Maine, where they're very prominent in conservation projects. But we also have academic expertise that goes all over the world that I think needs to figure out how to make this a big tent. Okay,
right.
So I have...
let me just real quick and say that Middlebury is working both on a conservation project in China with TNC and the villagers in that area, and we're also working in Chile with local villages. So it is important for us to understand, and not just to carry our own models there, but to adapt those to the indigenous people. So thanks for mentioning it.
Okay. We have time for about 2 more questions. Tom Howe asks, to what extent does climate change, the overarching global connection we all share, present an opportunity for strengthening international land conservation collaboration versus competition for attention, resources, and so on? That's a great and very important question. Do either of you have any thoughts on climate change and how that might draw us together to achieve very ambitious conservation goals in the 21st century?
Well, yeah, I think it's a great question, and you know, I think you know, Paris gave us a little hope on all this, right? That there is, we're getting to a point of having to recognize, you know, even our country, the overarching global connection, as you put it, and that it is an opportunity. One of the things that came out of Paris was a focus on forests and the importance of forests in the climate equation. So, you know, the potential, the recognition and the potential also, frankly, for financial resources to accelerate, to protect habitat, protect forests, you know, could be a huge opportunity and a big change in terms of making those resources available. So hopefully it will, you know, we will get there. I am more hopeful now than I would have been before Paris, although, as we know, there's still a long way to go.
One of the things I want to add to that is that the global investment community is trying to think about this as well. There's a whole knot of conservation finance people working on these problems. And I think it's important to note that there's a lot of money, billions of dollars being raised for something called green bonds, which mostly is going to solar energy and wind projects and energy efficiency projects, which are absolutely necessary in this climate change challenge that we face. But we also need to find very large and protect very large carbon sinks, places where nature can take up carbon as it has been doing for millennia. And that is a tremendous opportunity for the land conservation community if we can figure out a financial mechanism to financially sustain the stewardship of carbon sinks.
That's exactly what I was going to suggest, just the carbon sinks and the large forest tracts. And we're applying now for credits on the breadloaf land, with an organization in California, so that we'll be able to continue to keep that land as productive carbon sequestering forest land. And it's a great question from Tom Howe, who I'm proud to say children are Middlebury students and Middlebury alums. So
there you go.
Shout out to Tom.
So last question from the floor here in Cambridge, a very quick one. How do you, with perhaps a lengthier answer, how do you engage alumni in conservation efforts? How do you identify who these people are, and how do you engage them? And I think that would be an area where Middlebury might have particular expertise given all the environmentally conscious people that come out of your institution?
I'll jump in there and say that it's interesting that institutions of higher education, development offices and advancement offices by other names have ways that they profile their larger donors, their principal gifts. And it's fascinating that they oftentimes overlook these organizations that they belong to. And it's those organizations that leap out at me, whether someone belongs to or is on the board of Trout Unlimited, you know, Rocky Mountain Elk Association, on and on and on. These people are really making huge gifts. All people on your boards of trustees are people who are working with the Nature Conservancy. We have several internships now all over the world that alumni are paying for with TNC because we've been able to identify that network. But ordinarily, schools don't identify those attributes in their alumni profile. So what we've been able to do is just create a sidebar of all the people we know who are involved in this work and give that information to the alumni office.
All right, I'm going to close this out with a comment that came in from Cole Mannix, who is a leader of the Blackfoot Challenge effort in which Fred Danforth was so intimately involved during his lifetime. Cole says, our rural areas are quickly losing the jobs, people, and communities who contribute to the work of land stewardship. And he actually asked, this is a question, but I'll make it into a statement, which is that we need to continually look for economic development opportunities that make conservation something that is part of the livelihoods of the people who live in these beautiful places, from the Blackfoot Valley in Montana to the beautiful shots of South Africa and rural Canada that you've seen in this presentation. So Cole, we take your point. It's an excellent point, and we look forward to working with you and all the other people in the audience. Thank you all so much for sharing this session with you. We look forward to having you come back to another session later this year, and have a great day.